The night had fallen heavy over the quiet suburb, like a thick blanket of fear waiting to be lifted. But no one knew danger was hiding in the silence. A cold wind scraped against the cracked pavement of the grocery store parking lot, rustling loose receipts and broken leaves, while the dim yellow lights flickered above the far corner. The kind of night that whispered warnings to those wise enough to listen. Tamara Reed had just stepped out of the store with a bag of discounted groceries, clutched against her chest. Her dark brown skin caught the pale glow of the overhead lights, and her natural hair was pulled back in a simple twist, practical and unpretentious, just like everything else about her life. She was a former Navy SEAL, though no one looking at her now would guess it. The quiet way she moved, the gentle curve of her shoulders, the softness in her tired eyes, all of amassed years of training that had shaped her into something fierce and unbreakable. But that was before she became a single mother. Before she started working double shifts at the auto repair shop on Jefferson Boulevard. Before her world shrank to the size of her 8-year-old daughter's smile and the bills that never stopped coming. Her daughter, Emily, was waiting at home with a babysitter, probably already asleep by now. Tamara had promised herself she would be back before bedtime, but the overtime hours had stretched long again, and the grocery run had taken longer than expected. Guilt sat heavy in her chest. The familiar companion of every working mother who feels she is never doing enough. She walked toward her old sedan, keys already in hand, mentally calculating whether the milk would last until Friday, and if she had enough left for Emily's school field trip fee. The math never worked out, no matter how many times she ran the numbers. But she kept going, because that was what mothers did. They kept going even when everything inside them wanted to stop. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Most sensible people had gone home hours ago. Tamara's boots echoed against the pavement as she passed the long row of empty spaces, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. She was tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your marrow and refuses to leave. And then she saw it. Something wrong. Something off in the shadows near the dumpsters at the far edge of the lot. It was the way a figure moved, the way another body stiffened, the way fear gathers quietly before exploding into violence. Tamara's trained eyes caught what most people would have missed. The slight resistance in a woman's posture. The aggressive grip of hands that did not belong. She stopped walking. Her heart thundered like it remembered war. Every nerve in her body snapped to attention, muscle memory from years of combat flooding back into her veins like electricity. She heard it then, barely audible over the wind. The quiet gasp of a woman being pulled away from the safety of the light and toward the darkness. A primal instinct surged inside her. Something that had never dulled, despite years away from active duty. And before she could fully think it through, the words ripped from her chest like a roar. Let her go. Tamara dropped the grocery bag without a second thought. Cans of soup and a carton of eggs hit the pavement, but she was already sprinting across the lot, her worn boots pounding against the cracked concrete. The cold air burned her lungs, but she did not slow down. She could not slow down. The attackers jerked the woman deeper into the shadows as Tamara closed the distance. The woman was struggling, stumbling, desperately trying to keep her feet under her. Her dark hair whipped wildly as they dragged her, and a muffled cry escaped her lips. The sound of someone fighting against terror and losing. Something in that fear struck straight at Tamara's soul. Maybe it was because the woman looked young, terrified, and alone. Maybe because she reminded Tamara of her younger sister, Denise, who had passed away years earlier in circumstances that still haunted her dreams. Or maybe because Tamara had lived too long carrying guilt for the things she had failed to save, the missions that went wrong, the faces she could not forget. Whatever it was, she knew she could not walk away. Not this time. Not ever again. Her muscles, though tired from years of working double shifts and raising a child alone, burst to life like someone had switched her back into combat mode. The training never leaves you. It lives in your bones, waits in your blood, ready to be summoned when the moment demands it. The attackers turned toward her as she approached, their faces twisted with surprise and anger. Two men, both larger than her, both clearly expecting an easy target and finding something very different instead. "Back off!" one of them shouted, his voice rough with threat. "This ain't your business." But Tamara saw only their intent and the trembling woman caught between them. She was not thinking about danger. She was not thinking about being outnumbered. She was thinking about what kind of mother she would be if she ran from something like this. What kind of example she would set for Emily if she walked away from someone who needed help. When she reached them, she ripped the first attacker off the woman, throwing him backward with a strength born of adrenaline and old training. He stumbled, cursing, clearly not expecting that kind of force from a woman who barely reached his shoulder. The second lunged at her with a broken bottle, the jagged glass catching the distant light like a warning. But Tamara pivoted sharply, years of hand-to-hand combat guiding her movements, and grabbed the man's wrist. She forced it down until the bottle shattered harmlessly against the concrete. The sound of glass exploding echoed through the empty lot like a gunshot. The woman scrambled back, clutching her shoulder, shaking violently. Tamara positioned herself between the victim and the attackers, breathing hard, feeling the familiar burn of a fight rising inside her. It was a fire she thought she had buried the day she left the military to raise Emily, a fire she had promised herself she would never need again. But the fire never truly dies. It only waits. One attacker swung wildly at her face, but Tamara ducked low, countered with a sharp elbow to his ribs, and sent him collapsing to the ground with a grunt of pain. The other tried to grab her from behind, but she slammed him against the brick wall, pinning him there until the fight drained out of him and he slid down in defeat. The entire confrontation lasted barely a minute. But for Tamara, it felt like walking through a memory she had tried to forget. One filled with violence, survival, and the haunting truth that no matter how much she tried to change her life, danger still found her. When the men finally scrambled away into the darkness, leaving their bruised pride and broken bottle behind, Tamara stayed frozen in place. Her fists were still clenched, her breath still ragged, her eyes still scanning the shadows for any sign of returning footsteps. They did not come. Slowly, carefully, she turned to the woman. The young woman was trembling so fiercely that Tamara worried she might collapse right there on the cold pavement. She kept brushing her hair out of her face with shaking hands, whispering fragmented breaths, trying desperately to calm herself. Her name, Tamara would later learn, was Rachel Porter, a 27-year-old nurse who had just finished a late shift at Mercy General Hospital across town. She had parked too far from the entrance because the lot had been full earlier, and she had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The cruelest kind of chance. Tamara approached carefully, her hands raised in calm reassurance, palms open and visible. She knew trauma. She knew how fear twists the world into something sharp and unbearable, how it makes every shadow feel like a threat and every stranger feel like a danger. She had lived inside that fear more times than she could count. Hey, it's okay. They're gone. You're safe now. Rachel's wide brown eyes softened when she saw Tamara's gentle expression, the quiet kindness in her face that contradicted the violence she had just unleashed. The young woman tried to stand straight, but the adrenaline was leaving her body, and her knees buckled. Tamara caught her before she hit the ground, her strong arms steadying Rachel's trembling frame. She guided her to sit near the curb, keeping enough distance so the woman would not feel cornered, but close enough to offer comfort. As Rachel caught her breath, she kept thanking Tamara through tears. Quiet, broken, overwhelmed thanks that made Tamara feel a strange ache blooming in her chest. The kind of ache that comes when you realize you have done something meaningful in a world that often feels meaningless. Thank you. Thank you. I thought I was going to ... Rachel could not finish the sentence. The words dissolved into quiet sobs. Tamara shook her head gently. You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone should do. But even as she said the words, Tamara knew they were not entirely true. Most people would have walked away. Most people would have pretended not to see, convinced themselves it was not their problem, protected themselves from the risk. That was the easier path. The safer path. Tamara had never been good at taking the easier path. Rachel clung to her torn jacket, still shaking, and the raw fear on her face made Tamara want to check the shadows again. She slipped off her own jacket, the old army surplus one that she had worn for years, and draped it over Rachel's shoulders. The younger woman accepted it with a trembling hand, pulling it close like a shield. When Rachel finally calmed enough to speak clearly, her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought I was gonna die in that dark corner. The world just ... disappeared. Everything went black except their hands on me. And I prayed. I prayed someone would hear me. Something in her voice struck Tamara deeply. Perhaps because she knew exactly what it felt like to pray for someone to show up and save you when you are alone, hopeless, and scared. She had been in that dark place before, more than once, and she knew that sometimes the prayers go unanswered, but not tonight. Tonight, Tamara had been the answer. Tamara called the police on her old flip phone, the one she kept because smartphones were an expense she could not justify. Her voice was steady as she reported the attack, gave the location, described the suspects. Years of military discipline kept her calm even when her hands wanted to shake as they waited for the patrol car to arrive. Tamara stayed beside Rachel, grounding her with steady breaths and soft reassurances. She did not push the young woman to talk, did not ask questions that would force her to relive the terror too soon. She simply sat there, a calm presence in the chaos, the way she wished someone had been there for her during the worst moments of her own life. The officers arrived with flashing lights and urgent voices. They took statements, asked questions, photographed the broken bottle, and promised to search for the attackers. One officer, a middle-aged white man with a skeptical expression, looked at Tamara with barely concealed surprise when Rachel described how she had fought off two men. "You did all that?" he asked, eyebrow raised. "By yourself?" Tamara met his gaze evenly, her dark eyes holding a quiet strength that made him look away first. "I served 12 years in the Navy, special operations. You learn a few things." The officer's expression shifted from skepticism to something that might have been respect. He nodded slowly and wrote something in his notebook. Even as the sirens faded into the night and the officers drove away to continue their search, Rachel did not want to leave alone. She was still shaking, still rattled, still fragile in that way that comes after trauma strips away your sense of safety in the world. Tamara did not feel right letting her go either. "Is there someone I can call for you?" Tamara asked gently. "Someone who can come get you?" Rachel nodded, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. "My brother, Marcus. He lives about 20 minutes away." Tamara offered to wait with her until Marcus arrived, and Rachel accepted with visible relief. The thought of standing alone in that parking lot, even for a moment, was clearly more than she could bear. While they waited, Rachel asked about Tamara, who she was, why she had reacted like that, how she had fought like someone trained for war. The questions came tentatively at first, then with growing curiosity. Tamara hesitated. She was not used to talking about herself, especially not about the years she had spent in service. Those memories belonged to a different version of her, a woman who had believed she could save the world one mission at a time. before reality had taught her that some things cannot be saved no matter how hard you fight. But something about Rachel's earnest attention made her open up, just a little. She told her she was a former Navy SEAL who now worked at a local auto shop and raised her daughter on her own. That she had left the military because she wanted to be present for Emily, wanted to give her the childhood Tamara herself had never had. The surprise on Rachel's face softened into something like admiration. "God must have placed you here at the right moment," she said quietly. "There's no other explanation." Tamara simply nodded, not trusting herself to respond. She had not felt like anyone's miracle in years. Most days, she felt like a woman barely holding her life together with worn-out thread and stubborn determination. When Rachel's brother finally arrived, his tires screeching into the parking lot, Tamara watched the young man leap from his car and sprint toward his sister. Marcus Porter was tall and broad-shouldered, with the same warm brown skin as Rachel and eyes that were wild with fear and relief. He grabbed Rachel in a fierce embrace, holding her like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. Words tumbled out of him, questions and reassurances, and the kind of protective anger that comes from loving someone too much to bear seeing them hurt. When Marcus finally released his sister, he turned to Tamara with tears glistening in his eyes. "You saved her," he said, his voice cracking. "The police told me what happened. You saved my baby sister." Tamara shook her head, uncomfortable with the weight of his gratitude. "I just did what needed to be done." "No." Marcus stepped forward and took her hands in his grip warm and firm. "Don't minimize this. You risk your life for a stranger. That's not nothing. That's everything." Before she could respond, Rachel hugged Tamara tight, wrapping her arms around the woman who had pulled her back from the edge of something terrible. For a moment, Tamara felt Rachel's gratitude sink into her bones, filling spaces she had not realized were empty. "Thank you," Rachel whispered against her shoulder. "Thank you for hearing me." As Marcus helped his sister into the car, Rachel looked back at Tamara through the open window. Her face was still pale, still marked by the night's terror, but something else flickered there too. Something like hope. "You saved more than my life tonight," Rachel said softly. "You saved my hope. My belief that good people still exist." The car pulled away, its taillights glowing red in the darkness until they disappeared around the corner. Tamara stood alone in the empty parking lot, the cold wind cutting through her thin shirt now that she had given away her jacket. She thought about Rachel's words, about hope and belief and the strange miracle of being in the right place at the right time. For years, Tamara had felt like she was failing at life, barely paying bills, missing sleep, carrying guilt from missions that still haunted her dreams, wondering if leaving the military had been a mistake, if she had given up the only thing she was ever good at. But tonight, she had done something that mattered, deeply and undeniably mattered. She had made someone safe again. Slowly, she walked back to where she had dropped her groceries. The eggs were cracked, the milk carton dented, but most of the items had survived. She gathered them into the torn plastic bag and made her way to her car, her body suddenly heavy with exhaustion. Emily would be asleep by now. The babysitter would be annoyed. The bills would still be waiting on the kitchen counter. But something inside Tamara felt different, lighter, like a weight she had carried for years had shifted just enough to let her breathe. She started the car and drove home through the quiet streets, the memory of Rachel's words echoing in her mind. "You saved my hope." Maybe, Tamara thought, she had saved a little bit of her own too. Over the next few days, Tamara tried to return to her routine, waking Emily for school, packing her lunch with whatever she could stretch from the pantry, working long hours at the auto shop, eating leftover dinners that never quite tasted like home. But something inside her was changing. She kept replaying the moment she had seen Rachel being dragged away, how she had reacted without hesitation, how her body had remembered what her mind had tried to forget. It reminded her that the world was full of unpredictable darkness, but also full of choices that defined who she was. She had chosen to act, and that choice had meant everything. Rachel reached out a few days later, calling the number Tamara had given her that night. Her voice was still fragile, but stronger than before. She wanted to thank Tamara again, she said, and she wanted to check on her, to make sure the woman who had saved her was okay too. The question surprised Tamara. No one asked if she was okay. No one thought to wonder if the rescuer might need rescuing herself. They talked for almost an hour that first call. Slowly, tentatively, building a connection grounded in something deeper than chance. Rachel told Tamara about her work at the hospital, about the patients she cared for, about how she had become a nurse because she wanted to help people feel less alone in their worst moments. Tamara found herself opening up in ways she rarely did. She talked about Emily, about the joy and terror of raising a child alone, about the nights when she lay awake wondering if she was doing enough. She talked about the military, about the brothers and sisters she had served beside, about the ones who had not come home. "I feel safer knowing someone like you exists in the world," Rachel said near the end of the call. That sounds strange, maybe, but it's true. Tamara was quiet for a moment. "I'm not sure I deserve that," she admitted. "I've made plenty of mistakes. Failed plenty of times. Haven't we all?" Rachel's voice was gentle. "But you showed up when it mattered. That's what counts." As weeks passed, Rachel and Tamara became unlikely but steady friends. The kind of friendship that forms in the crucible of shared experience, tempered by honesty and held together by mutual respect. Rachel met Emily one sunny Saturday afternoon when she stopped by Tamara's small apartment with a basket of homemade muffins. Emily, curious and bright-eyed, took to Rachel instantly. Within an hour, they were sitting on the worn carpet together, coloring pictures of butterflies and talking about everything and nothing. Tamara watched them from the kitchen doorway, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. For so long, her world had been small and lonely, just her and Emily against everything. But now, someone else was there, someone who saw her, truly saw her, and chose to stay. Rachel started coming by regularly. She would bring small treats for Emily, help with homework, or join them for simple dinners of rice and beans that Tamara stretched as far as she could. She did not show up because she felt indebted. She showed up because something in Tamara's courage had ignited something in her own heart. They never spoke about that night, unless Rachel needed to process it. Sometimes, without warning, the memories would surface, and Rachel would grow quiet, her eyes going distant. Tamara learned to recognize the signs. She would simply sit beside her friend, offering silent presence, never rushing her, always grounding her with quiet strength. "I still have nightmares," Rachel admitted one evening as they sat on Tamara's tiny balcony, watching the sun set over the rooftops. Emily was inside, engrossed in a cartoon. "I wake up feeling their hands on me, and for a moment, I forget that I got away." Tamara nodded slowly. "I know about nightmares. They don't go away, not really, but they get quieter over time. The spaces between them get longer. How do you deal with them?" Tamara considered the question carefully. "I remind myself that I survived, that I'm still here, that every day I get to wake up is a day those nightmares didn't win." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the words. Then she reached over and took Tamara's hand, squeezing gently. "You're the strongest person I've ever met." Tamara laughed softly, a rare sound. "I don't feel strong most days. I feel tired, overwhelmed, like I'm holding everything together with duct tape and prayers." "That's what real strength is," Rachel said. "Showing up anyway, even when you're falling apart inside. You do that every single day." The bond they formed came not from romance or obligation, but from survival. From the understanding that both of their lives had shifted the moment Tamara had yelled those two words into the darkness. Let her go. That moment had set in motion something neither of them had expected. Something full of compassion, healing, and the quiet possibility of new beginnings. Rachel encouraged Tamara to explore counseling for veterans, something Tamara had always resisted. But with Rachel's gentle persistence, she finally made an appointment at the VA clinic downtown. The sessions were difficult at first, dredging up memories she had buried deep. But slowly, week by week, she began to feel the pressure in her chest ease. Emily noticed the changes. "Mama," she said one night as Tamara tucked her into bed, "you smile more now." Tamara kissed her daughter's forehead, blinking back unexpected tears. "I do, baby. I really do." Meanwhile, Rachel was healing too. She returned to work at the hospital, though she now parked close to the entrance and never walked her car alone. She joined a support group for survivors of assault, finding strength in shared stories and shared pain. And she credited Tamara with giving her the courage to keep going. "You didn't just save my life," she told Tamara one afternoon. "You showed me that I was worth saving, that someone thought my life mattered enough to risk their own." Tamara felt the words settle into her heart like seeds taking root. For so long, she had believed her worth was measured in missions completed, battles won, enemies defeated. But maybe worth was simpler than that. Maybe it was just showing up when someone needed you. A year passed. The seasons turned from cold to warm and back again. Emily grew 2 inches and lost her first tooth. Tamara got a small raise at the shop and finally paid off the credit card that had been haunting her for years. Rachel started dating Marcus's best friend, a kind man named David, who treated her like she was made of both steel and starlight. The attackers from that night were never caught. Tamara sometimes wondered if they ever thought about what happened, if they ever realized how close they had come to destroying a life. But she did not dwell on it. Justice was not always found in courtrooms and prison cells. Sometimes it was found in survival, in healing, in the simple act of refusing to be broken. On the 1-year anniversary of that night, Rachel invited Tamara and Emily to her apartment for dinner. Marcus was there, along with David and Rachel's mother, a warm woman named Grace, who hugged Tamara so tight it felt like being wrapped in love itself. "You're family now," Grace said, her eyes glistening. "Anyone who saves my daughter is family forever." Tamara did not know what to say. Family had always been a complicated word for her. Her own parents had been absent and neglectful, her sister gone too soon. She had built walls around her heart to keep the loneliness from consuming her. But here, in this small apartment filled with laughter and the smell of homemade food, those walls felt unnecessary. She was surrounded by people who cared about her, who saw her for who she truly was and loved her anyway. After dinner, while Emily played with Grace in the living room, Rachel pulled Tamara aside. They stood by the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the darkness. "I think about that night a lot," Rachel said quietly. "Not the attack, but you. Your voice cutting through the dark." Those 2 words that changed everything. Tamara nodded slowly. "Let her go. Let her go," Rachel repeated. "You know what I realized? Those words weren't just for them. They were for me too. You let me go from my own fear. You set me free." Tamara felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and warm. "You set me free too," she admitted. "For years, I thought I was worthless outside the battlefield, that I had nothing left to offer. But you helped me see that bravery in everyday life is just as meaningful." But you helped me see that bravery in everyday life is just as meaningful. Maybe more. They embraced, 2 women who had found each other in the darkest moment and emerged into the light together. Later that night, as Tamara drove home with Emily asleep in the back seat, She thought about everything that had happened since that cold night in the parking lot. The fear, the violence, the unexpected connection. The healing that came slowly, painfully, but surely. She realized that she had spent years thinking she was ordinary. Just a woman trying to survive, trying to raise her daughter right, trying to make it through each day without falling apart. But maybe that was exactly what made her extraordinary. Because the biggest heroes are not the ones in capes and costumes. They are the ones who think they are ordinary until the moment life asks them to be extraordinary. They are the tired mothers working double shifts. The strangers who stop to help. The survivors who refuse to give up. They are the ones who hear a cry in the darkness and choose to answer. Tamara pulled into her parking spot and sat for a moment, listening to Emily's soft breathing. The moon hung low over the rooftops, silver and serene. The world was quiet now, peaceful in a way it rarely felt. She smiled. A real smile. The kind that starts in the heart and works its way out. Then she lifted her daughter gently, carried her inside, and closed the door on the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, new moments when she would have to choose who she wanted to be. But tonight, Tamara Reed knew exactly who she was. A mother, a warrior, a friend, a hero in the truest sense of the word. And that was more than enough. Asterisk, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Unbroken Grace Stories community. Where are you watching from?